maybe we'll talk just briefly about the Voting Rights Act fix, the bipartisan Voting Rights Act fix. People know the history of this. The Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, the pre-clearance formula. So they didn't gut the aspect of the Voting Rights Act which calls for pre-clearance. They just said, you're not pre-clearing the right people. You got to go back to Congress. Even though you have reauthorized the pre-clearance measures 4 years ago, you got to go back and rewrite it. They have, or a bill has been written, it's bipartisan bill that Sensenbrenner and Conyers have introduced, or I think are on the verge with introducing legislation with Senator Pat Leahy, who's going to do so in the Senate.
And I'll say, first of all, what the Supreme Court obviously did was a travesty. We can agree on that. But looking at what I've looked at, I have to say I'm impressed with Sensenbrenner, who I never thought a whole lot of until it seemed like he really seemed to care about this, and he seems to, this doesn't seem to be the Republican, oh yeah, let's negotiate over health care, and they're just trying to sort of,
oh no, I think this is legit.
By the time he seems to really actually care about this, which I give him credit for. And I think looking over this does make some sense. It seems.
Well, let me go over it for 1
ahead.
second, so just so that we know what we're talking about. It basically says there is a new formula for Section 4, which makes you eligible for pre-clearance. So it would replace of those, I guess it was 15 or 12 states. It would replace Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. Would be put back under, would now require pre-clearance, and it would do so because it has had 5 or more violations in the past 15 years. Leaving out Alabama, Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia, which were all subject to pre-clearance before the Supreme Court struck down that formula in the Shelby case. And it would also say that in that assessment, where you have had 5 or more violations in the past 15 years of the Voting Rights Act, the voter ID laws that have been struck down, and in fact, in Pennsylvania, one was just struck down by a state court, I think today.
That's right. That just happened.
That would not be included as one of those things that would throw you back into pre-clearance. And that
was my question reading this. It's the only thing I don't get is what is considered a violation?
Everything else that has hitherto considered a violation. Whenever the Justice Department or a federal court has found that you're violating the voting rights of people under the Voting Rights Act, that would be considered a violation.
So why wouldn't, if they decide your voter ID law is unconstitutional, why isn't that considered a violation?
That's the negotiated part of this bill, that basically we're just going to now say that when it's found that, now that doesn't mean that the Justice Department can't still bring court cases and say that voter ID is unconstitutional. It's just that will not count as part of the formula to have you pre-cleared. There are, okay. And that is very problematic, of course, because
that seems like a little bit of BS written in here.
It gives some credence to the idea of voter ID laws. However, we should say that the other sections, Section 3, is strengthened because now plaintiffs now have to show that jurisdictions they want to bail in. Section 3 is the bail in. Plaintiffs no longer have to prove intentional violation of the Voting Rights Act, just that there was a de facto one. And there's a couple of other provisions. Now, I don't know where this law is going to go, but the real question is, is it worth it? Is it worth it doing this formula, which could be the only thing that could pass? Maybe even this wouldn't even pass. When you're ensconcing at least voter ID, making it a little bit less.
Right. Well, I think it is worth it. It seems to me. And again, I read through it, but I didn't even understand that the voting ID part. I'd read that, and it didn't make sense to me. Now, it makes sense to me. It's not because of any real reason. They're just leaving it out.
Right.
And that seems to be the biggest thing that's going to be violated, quite frankly, by the states, which is why it's probably being left out. That's the most effective way of disenfranchising people. Or certainly one of them. So yeah, I've got a problem with that. But like everything else, I don't think there's ever a bill that passes that I don't have a problem with. I mean, if it reinstitutes a lot of these other things that we desperately need. As long as the courts keep doing their part in Texas and Pennsylvania and other places and striking down these ridiculous voter ID laws, then I would say that this is very much worth it.
Yeah, I think so.
We can hopefully get to a future place. People forget that in 2016, there will be a Democrat at the top of the ticket. The Republicans then won't be able to rely on old white guys the way they can more often do in midterms and whatever, and are going to have to put up somebody that can actually win an election, generally somebody who doesn't plop themselves down on a bridge and block it. The Republicans are going to have a hard time then, and frankly, what I point out to people that bring up the Senate situation in 2014 is all the people in 2016 who had no business winning in 2010, who won because of Citizens United and the wave. That these people are going to have to hold on to your Pat Toomey's and Kelly Iotes and people like that, Ron Johnson in Wisconsin, who have been way to the right of the states they're in. They're going to. So there's a great chance that you get a Democratic president and you get a Democratic, even a stronger Democratic Senate, or if you lose it briefly, you get it back. And the House, that would be the time when, if we're going to win the House back, I think we can pick up House seats this time if they run on the right issues. But that would be the time, and then you can improve all of this stuff. Then you can make it better. Why, in the meantime, shouldn't we make it somewhat better with the plan of making it fully better, hopefully a couple years down the road? That's what seems to me to make sense.
I think there's. I would tend to agree. The one thing to look out for is just from a strategic standpoint in terms of voting rights advocates. Did it make sense to concede that that part about voter ID not being a litmus test for being subject to this Section 4 formula? If this bill never makes it to the floor,
you can undo that, right? I mean,
well, you can undo it. The question is if it's not enough to bring this bill to the floor, have you sort of in some way destigmatize that just a little bit? My guess is on balance, I'm with you. I think I
just think rhetorically you stand up and you say, we don't like this. We think this part of it is not good. But overall, it's sort of like if we pass immigration reform, if we were, putting like sharks and lasers and whatever else they want to put up on some stupid fence that doesn't work along the border. And I'm, of course, exaggerating, but the whole stuff about we must protect it and the fence and all that, that's crap. And hopefully crap we would undo down the road. But to me, if it gives people a path to citizenship, you still do it. Right. You know what I mean? I feel like, because and you're conceding a point with that too. You're admitting in a way, unless you stand up and you make it very clear rhetorically, that there is a problem on the border, as if people are trying to sneak in, which they're, by the way, not anymore because our economy sucks. But, you're conceding that in a way by supporting that, but I just think you need to make it very clear you're supporting it in spite of that and not because of it. And you're going to we're going to come back to this later. When things are in a different position congressionally.
Right.
I feel that way with a lot of legislation, and I think this is the way I feel with this.
All right, let's